Friedrich Nietzsche, one of my favorite philosophers, said, "You're under the presumption that you think, but in the meantime, you're being thought." And that sits with what I keep saying to people, is that whatever you believe, whatever you think, whatever you're going through, know that there's a lot going on here. There's a lot happening in this life, in this universe, inside your head, your heart, and inside other people, outside other people. There's a lot going on everywhere. And we're going to look at that. Is it order? Is it chaos? You know, is everything just a nihilistic coming together by accident? Or is everything absolutely perfectly supposed to be just like it is? Well, I suppose the genesis is in the beginning, you were born. Let's start there, why not? And in the beginning, you were born, and that's what we would say is up here. So we would look at this like life, like a clock. And life is a cycle. Everything within life seems to be a cycle, day and night and so on. So what we can see from the cycles of life, the seasons of life, is that there are stages that we tend to all go through. And we go on a hero's journey, sure, but there is so much happening that is pulling and pushing us, as well as our own absolute freedom to choose even life or death. So it's all out there for us. It's holistic, all-encompassing. Everything is included. Nothing's excluded. The answer is always yes, even if you say no. And now we get into philosophy. But let's keep it simple for a minute and imagine that 12 o'clock at the top is a clock. And that clock, as we know, is only ticking one way. You know, you're moving out of the past into a future. So everything that is present as now has now passed, and time has literally moved forward from the time where you started the video. We've now moved into a future which is back to a present moment. So for me is a cycle, but we don't need to get into that too much. Let's look for the similarities between us and everything else, and not the differences. At 12 o'clock, we're born. We walk into the hospitals and you will see a baby on the mother's chest, and that happiness, that sheer joy. I always remark that the faces, the expressions on the mother's faces looks exactly the same, no matter where they're taken, hundreds of years apart. There's always that sense of utter bliss and joy. And of course, life doesn't stay there. You move forward. Your body is changing, growing, always moving forward. We cannot stop the ticking of that clock. So we grow, and we hit around, say, 2 o'clock over here, and we move from absolute innocence, honesty, a real value system of who we are when we're young kids. You know, we've put it up there as simple. You don't have those ego defense mechanisms that really keep you away from other people. So you're engaged, you're connected, and you're honest, and very open and very willing to try new things, please your parents and so on. And then it doesn't stay like that either. This system is going and flowing. So what it does is it goes down a little further, and you end up, let's say one day, with a sibling, and there's a glass of spilt milk, and mom says, you spilt that milk to you, but you didn't. It was actually your sister who spilt the milk. And you say to your mom, no, mom, you're wrong. It wasn't me, it was my sister. And your sister looks at your mom and says, it wasn't me, it was her. So that is the thing. It tends to go wrong. You would be blamed for something. You might even get a hiding for that incident. People might say, don't you ever lie, and you're not lying. And right there and then, bang, in the early times, things are starting to go wrong. So life is not going to just flow. It's going to be problem, solution, problem, solution. So we know that. But at around 2, some people say 1, 2, or 3, depending whether you're following psychology, which school of psychology, and so on. But let's go for 2. And at the age of around 2, you make one of the most important decisions that you will make in your life. A decision that you might make again every 7 or 8 years, but this is the first one that we know of. Is the world a malevolent and violent place? Or is the world a kind, loving, and beautiful place? So right there, when we this small, we make that big decision. And that decision is about survival. It's about keeping us alive. It's about protecting us. So if we're in a harsh environment, we need to toughen up. We need to close up a bit. We need to be far more cautious. We can't say the wrong things. We can't do the wrong things. We have to really struggle for what we want. Keeping secrets, hiding things would probably become second nature. And if the world's, of course, a good place and a kind place and a loving place, we would stay more open as we go down the line. Right here, when we're young, we develop codependence. So codependence is really everybody's first addiction. Everybody, each and every one of us, were codependent. Some of us stay codependent, sure. Some of us stay with that sort of hand stuck on the stove. And that is work we need to do when we're older. But it really happens here. You have no choice about being codependent on somebody for love, for warmth, for your basic human needs. So you will learn to see a father's smile. You might be able to please him by making him laugh, or by playing the piano, or by fetching him things, doing special things for him. And we learn all of those things, and they become part of who we are. And that codependence is there again to keep us safe. So it says here we are building walls. Personal walls are created way, way early, and they are there out of necessity. Often we would say you've built yourself a container, and you are slowly filling that container with, is the world kind, angry, whatever it's going to be, you are filling it. So those walls are 100% there to be created. Now, having walls there and having walls at 30 when you're trying to connect with people and trying to have relationships and positive business experiences and so on can really affect our performance. So trauma is inevitable in life. You're gonna be blamed. You're gonna be shamed. People are gonna accuse you for things, and it's gonna affect you. So each time these things happen to us, these traumas, which again, just like the codependence, we've all had trauma, it's going to toughen you up. You are going to learn from each and every experience much, much better, far more neuroplasticity than you would have in, say, later life, which is further around the clock. You would be able to learn quickly out of necessity to protect yourself. Ego defense mechanisms are created through the trauma. And what is the cure for trauma and codependence? Establishing new boundaries, new self, and new self-concept, but we'll get to that in a bit. What's worse, we hit puberty around 12, 13 as the clock ticks further down life. So things are very physical in this first quadrant of life. They're very physical, they're about our bodies. You know, you're either tall, you're worried about your height, your size. People might say you've got big ears, small breasts, big nose, big ears, whatever it's going to be, and you will take great offense, great defense in protecting yourself against that. So as we know, bullying is rife at this age as well. So the protection is definitely there that we need. You're occupied with yourself and your looks. You want to fit in. You want to look the part. You want to be part of the in crowd. It's very, very important to somebody who's going through puberty somewhere around the age of 12 to even 18. So the preoccupation with yourself, with your looks, is very, very, very much alive at this stage of life. You want to fit in. You need to fit in. You want to be part of the in crowd. You want to be part of a crowd, and you start looking for ways to do that. And how you do that is you create your personality, your persona. And your persona essentially comes from the word masks. So you are putting on masks all the time trying to survive, trying to thrive. And even when people ask you, how are you? You answer by this age, I'm fine, I'm okay. Even if you are being crushed by life inside and you are depressed and lonely and afraid and you're worried that you can't win races, you will still probably say you're fine. And that brings out an inner and outer world, which is already one of the first splits that we get. So the separation from the self can be seen as an inner world that might be down, it might be depressed, it might be lonely, and an outer world, the masks we put on for other people, where we are always happy, always shiny, eager to win. It's like nothing phases us. So I think the real problem with this stage is that our inner worlds and our outer worlds no longer match. There's cognitive dissonance. There is some kind of separation, and it's definitely not flowing with life. And you develop your inner and outer world and get a pained interior from that. So things again, just like being accused of things when we spilt the milk, can go wrong again as they do through life. So the trauma indeed can continue. When we reach about 17, 18, again, not chronological, I'm using age as a guide, we will get to a more psychological stage. In other words, you'll want to understand things more deeply. You will want to look at things that you are learning in school or college and go into and possibly specialize in a couple of these different things. So you become from physical more psychological. Obviously in this kind of phase of life around 5, 6 o'clock here, you go to university. You start really accruing knowledge and knowing that that wisdom, knowledge, experience is going to help you get to where you need to go in life. So as life is expanding, we are moving from the physiological stuff, which is very solid energy, to a more neurological, neuro meaning brain, simply more neurological. We're relying on our brain a lot more. And as we do that and get filled with information and learn new languages, learn guitar, learn whatever it's going to be, we develop the self-concept, continue developing defense mechanisms. When we're hurt, we're quickly defended. And this is actually where our ego insurgents come from, where they are designed to quickly get us up and going and get us, running. So, imagine a gazelle in the field and it's being chased by a lion. As it drops, it needs to learn how to get up quickly. If it doesn't, it's not going to make it. It's not going to live very long. So you are being honed and trained to thrive and survive through life. So at around 6 o'clock, at the bottom of the clock on our Samsara, we are going to experience something called the dark night of the soul. And why we've put it at 6 o'clock is simply because that's halfway there. And it seems like, as Carl Jung would say, there are two halves of life, the morning and the afternoon of life. But this dark night of the soul is where they get split. So in the dark night of the soul, things like depression come along, heaviness, you get held back more by what becomes not so much psychological as the beginnings of mixed emotions. And these emotions are really coming alive, and sometimes at conflict with how we think. We don't always feel that way. And this turbulence starts to happen, and a lot of suicide happens here. A lot of people fall into a dark night of the soul, which has been described as people just, by some people who we've treated, just hanging below the surface of a water. And a dark night of the soul has really been described to me by people as sort of treading water, in a big dark ocean, and they just can't get their head, no matter what they do, above the waterline, even though it might look like other people are just doing this samsara easily. They're battling, and some of them are dying inside. And this is where a lot of fear comes in. It's where a lot of torment happens. And in that dark night of the soul, some of us actually believe that there is no way through. So you're going to be stuck here. And I think that's the reason for the suicide. If you cannot see that there's a corner metaphorically, to turn here, then you won't be able to continue in the same way that someone else can, through purpose and meaning. I know I've just got to get through this, is a mindset that people just don't really all have. And that's where we need to help each other. There's a story of a guy who jumped off the San Francisco bridge, fell down, went down 50 feet into the water, and a seal came and brought him up to the surface. Now, he couldn't move his legs. He had crushed certain vertebrae on his back from the fall. There were tons of witnesses on the bridge. They had all seen this happen, and a seal coming out of the water. Maybe Nietzsche was right with what he said in his quote earlier, that we are being done, something's happening. But although that's possibly a real story about it, it's still happening in your mind. You're still going off a precipice. You're still looking over a tipping point, and it's scary. And some people feel that if they move forward, they'll drown. And depression, anxiety, a lot of personality disorders all get started at this age, or at least entrenched at this age, and really start to show when people can't cope with life. But coping with life is not what we're here for. And I think that's really something that we need to do, is go beyond the coping. And to say that to somebody is not going to make any sense. They're going to say, I can barely cope, and you're telling me how to thrive. That makes no sense. Just tell me how to live, tell me how to breathe. And it comes down to those basic elements. You go back down to needing some kind of certainty in your life. And the certainty is not the same certainty you had as a kid. It's not that codependence. It's not those defense mechanisms. It must be something more real and new. So swimming across the dark night of the soul is going to take us into the second half of life. Now, if you can get there, if you can traverse and navigate those waters, there's a big reveal. There's a big reveal. And this is what cultures call a spiritual awakening, being born again, awakened to the processes of life. So all of these things, it doesn't matter what language we use, are all, for me, a big reveal for people. Seldom do we see people have big reveals without some kind of dark night of the soul in the beginning. Literally every teacher that we use to help and teach people, Joe Dispenza, Broken Back, I Am by Tom Shadyac, fell off his bicycle, same story. And on it goes. Byron Katie with the depression, a cockroach crawling over her foot. Eckhart Tolle sitting on a park bench. Neil Donald Walsh pretty much doing the same, becoming destitute and begging for money after they've navigated these dark nights of the soul. There's always some sort of big reveal. I mean, Wayne Dyer wrote his first book, Your Erroneous Zones, once he forgave his father. Only once he forgave him did he realize that he was in a dark night of the soul for decades. He was drinking too much, he was angry, he was resentful, and it was hurting him, his career, his personal life. And when he went one day to his father's grave and forgave, he gave back the story. He had a big reveal and wrote that book in 8 days and sold 40 million copies and began his life. Louise Hay, overcoming cancer, multiple traumas, and one problem after another. Once she had a big reveal, she also pushed through and started her company and never looked back. So there's one story after the other about how a dark night of the soul precedes a big reveal. So what this does is, this to me is a symbol or a sign that we have moved into the second half of life. If you've got through your dark night of the soul and kept your head about you when all those around you are losing theirs, then you have survived and awakened normally to something what we call your higher self, your spiritual self, whatever it might be. So Carl Jung called these two sides, 1 to 6 o'clock, the morning of life, and 6 to 12 o'clock, the afternoon of life. So as we step into the afternoon of life, you get a feeling of, I'm getting it here. and you become joyful again. You can feel some bliss, some connection, and some real meaning in life. You can tend, when you're in the second half of life, to spend more time alone, contemplating what life's about. You can deepen connections with people that you love in the second half of life, far more than you could in the first half, when you were shrouded by the personality and the defense mechanisms. This side is far more emotional, far more spiritual at the top, and far more open than this side closed. So if we called the first side your container, this is when the contents have filled up and you can overflow into life. So awareness of a multifaceted self, more than you thought existed in the beginning. Not just a physical self, not just a clever self, not just an intellectual self. You know that there is a seen and unseen aspect to yourself, and then you start seeing there is a story greater than my own. So we can see that when we've been through this, we return to self ontologically. So in other words, there is much more of ourselves, and that is definitely part of what the big reveal is. You are so much more than mind and body. A lot of us try to keep those emotions down. In fact, we avoided the dark night of the soul at all costs. But there comes a time when avoiding isn't what life's about. And if you avoid pain, you will get 10,000 times more pain. So this side of life, the first half, goes from a very me kind of philosophy through to the second side, which is we. So it's literally, again, paradox, and it's flipped, which a lot of people who've been through a lot of dark nights of the soul will agree. You literally flipped upside down. And instead of breaking down further, which your avoidance was trying, everything it did, you can become an alcoholic for 20 years to avoid this big reveal. You can become depressed, addicted, you can be hospitalized, whatever your situation is going to be. That big reveal is far, far, far more scary to know it, to contemplate it, than a dark night of the soul. So returning to yourself ontologically means returning to yourself wholly. You're becoming more and more whole. Now, isn't it funny that people who have experienced a lot of death in their lives, they've had family members, people who they love, die, they don't become harder after the dark night. They tend to be much more compassionate, much more empathic, and they tend, most importantly, to contribute more. Grandparents contribute more to life than someone who is a teenager might, who hasn't been through suffering, trial, and so on. And as we move up here, we might be experiencing honesty, simplicity, values, far less defense egos. And now I get it. Now I understand what life's about. In the beginning, we do not have the capacity to understand what life's about until the pain and pleasure, the spiral dynamics, have pushed us. Pain pushes us far, far more than pleasure does. And once that pain has pushed us out of our comfort zones and up through mere survival, it's ground us through to loving more deeply, to connecting on a much higher level, and has taken us back far more to who we really are. And up there, of course, there's another big reveal. We're equally afraid of that second big reveal. That big reveal, is there anything that's after death? So people look at the dark night of the soul up here as the ultimate dark night of the soul. But what we're being told by people who take care in hospice, who take care of all people, is saying that this whole process is enlightenment at gunpoint. You know, it is a far, far more beautiful thing to experience death than it is actual birth. And we've had people who've worked in both. And I think, we don't see those things anymore. We don't see either death as a big reveal or birth as a big reveal anymore. Those things are done behind closed doors. So the emotional impact and the opening up and being able to see life in all its different guises and forms, is essential for us not to be afraid of what is actually happening.